Elira notices the man the moment she steps into the stone passage, because the rain seems to avoid him, as if even the storm is unsure where to land. He is caked in road filth and blood. His cloak is little more than torn wool, heavy with water. No shelter, no fire, only slick cobbles beneath him and lantern light trembling on the puddles. Yet he sits upright, back to the wall, like a fallen sovereign waiting for the world to remember its manners. Elira's chest tightens with that old, inconvenient mercy, the kind that has never paid her debts or fed her on winter nights. This morning, the lower quarter is a drowned ruin of smoke and wet stone. Rain threads down the mossed walls, turning the alley into a cold vein running through the city's belly. She clutches her satchel tighter and forces her feet forward. Because she is already late. Not for some gentle errand, but for the meeting that decides whether she keeps her room, her name, her fragile place among the living. Her rent is 3 weeks behind. The debt scribe has stopped sending notices and started sending men. If she fails today, the door will be barred, and the street will claim her next. She should not stop. She cannot. And yet, something about the vagrant makes her hesitate. Most guttermen curl inward, eyes down, hands out, begging the world to overlook them. This man does neither. His gaze lifts to meet hers, steady and unashamed. In the lantern glow, his eyes flash a muted gold, old coin, old command. He doesn't ask for help. He looks as though the passage belongs to him, and he is merely enduring its insult. Elira takes one step past him, then another, and realizes her body has betrayed her. She has already turned back. And that is how the Iron Crown found its way into a poor woman's hands, on the very day her own fate was due to be decided. Subscribe now so you're here for every turn this story takes. Now let me tell you what brought Elira into that rain-soaked quarter, and why she was desperate enough to gamble mercy against survival. The night before the storm, the debt scribe's seal arrived like a bruise on her door. It was pressed into cheap wax, cracked at the edges, as if even the city's authority was tired of pretending to be whole. Elira found it wedged beneath the threshold, damp from fog, the paper already curling as though it wanted to crawl back into the dark. She did not open it at once. She stood in the narrow room she rented above a baker's shop and listened to the building settle, wood sighing, pipes groaning, distant footsteps in the stairwell. Her heart was cold. Her blanket was thin. Her coin pouch was a sorry thing, a few copper moons, 2 dull silvers, and nothing that could quiet the hungry mouth of rent. When she finally broke the seal, the ink had bled slightly, rain had kissed it too. 3 weeks overdue. 2 days to remit. Failure will be answered by removal. No flourish. No insult. Those were for people who mattered enough to be mocked. The letter was plain because the threat was real. Elira folded it until the creases were sharp enough to cut and tucked it into her bodice like a secret wound. She tried to sleep. Sleep did not come. She saw the landlord's men instead, broad shoulders in narrow halls, hands that knew how to turn a lock into splinters. She saw her few belongings scattered into the street, her mother's comb, her father's old purse string, the patched cloak she'd sewn and resewn until the cloth remembered only thread. She saw herself standing in the rain with nowhere to go, and she hated the part of herself that still believed kindness might save her. In the earliest hour, when the sky was the color of old tin, she rose and dressed for war as poor women do, with quiet care. She braided her hair tight. She chose her least torn dress. She packed her satchel with the only things that could speak for her, 2 letters of reference from long-dead work, a handful of copied ledgers, and a small wooden token bearing the mark of the guildhouse she meant to beg. The meeting she'd secured was not an interview, not truly. No one in the high streets sat across polished tables to hear a low-quarter girl's hopes. But the Guild of Stewards had a clerk named Master Audrin who sometimes took pity on those who arrived early and spoke plainly. Elira had heard whispers that he needed hands, quiet hands, steady hands, to copy accounts for a merchant family whose fortunes were too vast to be trusted to apprentices. If she earned even a season's wage, she could pay rent, buy coal, breathe without tasting fear. So she stepped into the morning and began the long walk. The city wore its age like armor, stone upon stone, arch upon arch, walls that had watched empires rise and rot. Above, the towers of the upper quarter cut into the clouds like the ribs of a cathedral. Below, the lower quarter hunched close to the river, built where the ground was cheap and the air was not. Elira kept to the side streets. She counted her minutes the way some counted prayer beads. Rain began as a mist. Then it thickened into a steady, punishing fall, as if the sky had decided to collect its dew all at once. People vanished behind shutters. Market stalls sagged under wet cloth. Lantern flames trembled, stubborn and small. By the time she reached the bend that led toward the guildhouse, her cloak clung to her shoulders like a second skin. Her satchel strap cut into her collarbone. She was late enough that every footstep felt like a loss. She quickened her pace. And then she saw the narrow passage that would shave time from her route. It was an old service-way between two stone warehouses, walls slick with moss, ground uneven, lanterns strung like fireflies trapped in cages. Most avoided it in weather like this. Water gathered there. Shadows held their breath there. The lower quarter made its own rules, and a wise woman did not step into quiet places alone. Elira stepped in anyway. Because fear was a luxury too, and she could not afford it. That was when she found him. Not sprawled like the drunkards she'd seen sleeping in doorways. Not curled like the beggars who tried to make themselves small enough for the world to step over. He sat upright against the stone as though he had chosen the posture long ago and refused to change it even for death. His clothing was rags beneath a torn cloak. His hair was dark with rain, hanging in wet strands. His beard was rough, his skin streaked with grime, and yet, beneath the ruin, there was structure, a jaw that did not belong to the gutter, shoulders too broad to have been starved from birth. Blood seeped from his side, diluted into a thin red river by the downpour. Elira's first thought was the sensible one, not today. Her second thought was weaker, softer, more dangerous, he'll die. She told herself she did not care. She told herself she could not care. She reminded herself of the sealed letter and the 2 days and the landlord's men. Then the man lifted his gaze. His eyes were not the dull gray of hunger or the frantic dart of desperation. They were gold, muted, yes, like coin worn smooth by time, but unmistakably gold. And they held a calm attention that made the narrow passage feel suddenly too small. Not begging. Not pleading. Watching. Elira took one step past him. Then another. The stone beneath her boot betrayed her. She slipped on the slick cobbles and went down hard, her satchel thumping against the ground. Papers burst free, skittering into puddles like startled birds. She hissed a curse, half anger, half panic, and lunged to gather them. A shadow moved. A hand, large, steady, pressed a page flat against the wet stone before the wind could steal it. Another hand caught a second sheet and folded it cleanly, as if it mattered. Elira froze, kneeling in the water, staring at the stranger's fingers, rough at the knuckles, scarred like a man who'd known weapons, yet careful, too careful for someone with nothing. He held out her ledger copy, protected beneath his cloak. "Yours," he said. His voice was low, even, and wrong, in the way fine cloth is wrong in a beggar's bundle. Elira took the page with shaking hands. "You shouldn't move," she blurted, and immediately wished she hadn't spoken at all. He glanced down at his own side as if noticing the blood for the first time. "It is nothing." "It's not nothing. You're bleeding." He studied her face, not her coin pouch, not her satchel, her. The rain traced down his cheek, but he did not blink it away. "You are in a hurry," he said, as if stating a fact about the weather. "I am late," she admitted. The words tasted bitter. "And I can't afford to be late." His eyes flicked to the papers she'd spilled, numbers, neat columns, the proof of a woman trying to claw her way into steadier ground. Understanding passed through his expression like a shadow crossing a firelight. He nodded once. "Then go." It should have been easy. A dismissal. Permission. Instead, it struck her like a test. Elira gathered the remaining pages with trembling speed, stuffing them back into her satchel. As she rose, she saw the blood again, how it spread even through rain, how it clung to him as if it belonged. She reached into her pouch, meaning to offer a copper and silence her conscience. Her fingers touched the small, hard truth of her remaining coins. Too few. She pulled them out anyway. They lay in her palm, pitiful, bright against the gray morning. When she held them toward him, he did not reach. "I don't need," he began. "You do," she cut in, sharper than she meant. "For cloth. For broth. For something." He looked at the coins as though they were an unfamiliar language. Then, slowly, he closed her fingers over them again. "You need them more." Elira swallowed. "You don't know what I need." His gaze lifted back to hers, and for a heartbeat she had the strange sensation of standing before someone who had weighed kingdoms. "I know," he said softly, "what it is to stand at the edge and pretend you are not afraid." The words pried at her defenses. She hated him for it. Or perhaps she hated herself, for responding. Elira glanced toward the mouth of the passage. The guild house was still a long walk, rain-slick streets between her and the one chance she had. If she stayed, she might lose everything. If she left, he might die. She tried again to walk away. Her feet did not obey. With an exhale that felt like surrender, she stepped closer and crouched. "Let me see it." He hesitated, not with fear, but with restraint, as if allowing her this closeness was the more dangerous act. When he shifted his cloak aside, Elira's breath caught. The wound was not a scratch, not even a simple cut. It was a gash at his ribs, deep enough that she saw the edge of something darker beneath the skin. Blood welled fresh despite the cold and rain, and the flesh around it was bruised as if struck by more than a blade. "How are you still sitting?" she whispered. "Habit," he answered. "From what?" "Dying?" A flicker, almost amusement, touched his mouth, then vanished. "Perhaps." Elira pressed her lips together, fighting the rising panic. "You need a healer." His expression tightened at the word, the way a man might react to a name he had forgotten but once feared. "No." "You'll bleed out," she insisted. He looked past her, toward the rain. "Maybe I should." The bleakness in that single sentence hit her harder than the storm. Elira stood abruptly, as if she could shake it off. "No," she said, and surprised herself with the force of it. "No. Not like this. Not in a passage like Refuse." His gaze returned to her, sharper now. Why? Because she was not cruel. Because she knew what it was to be overlooked. Because if she left him, she would carry his eyes forever. Because something about him felt wrong, or ancient. She did not say any of that. She heard herself say instead, "Because it's raining." It was a foolish answer. A human answer. The kind of answer that could not be argued with. Elira offered her shoulder. "Can you stand?" For a moment, he did not move. Then he pushed himself up with controlled effort, like a man rising from a throne rather than a gutter. He swayed once, only once, and his hand found the wall, palm flattening against the stone as if listening to it. Elira slipped under his arm and felt the heat of him through drenched cloth, too warm for a man who'd been sitting in rain. "What is your name?" she asked, more to keep herself steady than out of politeness. Silence. Then, low, "I don't know." Elira glanced up. His jaw was clenched, not with embarrassment, but with something like anger, at himself, at the world, at the missing piece he could not seize. "You remember nothing?" He shook his head once. "I woke here. The rain was already falling. That should have been impossible. Men did not simply appear in alleys with wounds like that. Men had stories, drunken fights, failed thefts, angry lovers. This man had none." Elira swallowed. "Come," she said, and led him out of the passage. They moved through the lower quarter slowly. The rain made everything shine, cobbles like black glass, brick walls slick and dark, puddles reflecting lanterns like fallen stars. People watched from doorways with the quick, wary interest reserved for trouble. Some stared at the man, at the breadth of his shoulders, the way his gaze tracked movement even while injured, the subtle authority in his stance. A child stepped into their path, holding out a broken cup. "Coin?" Elira reached for her pouch without thinking, then stopped. Her fingers closed on emptiness. Shame rose hot in her throat. Before she could speak, the stranger's attention shifted to the child like a blade turning. Not cruelly. Precisely. The child faltered, suddenly aware of himself, of his dirty hands, of the way he stood. "Go home," the man said. The child blinked. "I." "Now," he said, and though he did not raise his voice, the street seemed to tighten around the word. The child turned and ran. Elira stared. "What did you just?" "I told him to go home," he said, as if this were ordinary. "They don't listen," she murmured. "Not to anyone." His gaze flicked to her. They listened. Elira's unease sharpened. "Who are you?" He looked at his own hands again, as if searching for an answer in the lines of his palms. "No one," he said, but the word rang false. By the time they reached her building, her arms ached from supporting his weight. Yet he moved with a strange economy, never fully collapsing into her, as though pride held him upright when flesh could not. Inside, the stairwell smelled of damp and old bread. A candle burned on the landing, its flame small and wavering. An elderly woman, Mistress Rowe, stood at her door, peering out with narrowed eyes. Elira stiffened. Mistress Rowe was the kind who measured neighbors like flour, by usefulness. "What is this?" the old woman demanded, eyeing the bleeding stranger. A man in need, Elira said, bracing herself. Mistress Rowe sniffed. Need is common. The stranger's gaze moved to the old woman. Not challenging. Not pleading. Acknowledging. Mistress, he said, and the word landed with the weight of etiquette from a higher world. Your stairs are unsafe. The third step is loose. Someone will fall. Mistress Rowe's expression flickered, annoyance, surprise, reluctant attention. Everyone knows that. Then why has it not been fixed? He asked. Mistress Rowe opened her mouth, then shut it. For a breath, she looked like a girl caught misbehaving. I'll tell the landlord, she muttered. You won't, he said calmly. You'll wedge it with wood. Now. Before someone breaks a hip. Elira expected outrage. Instead, Mistress Rowe's gaze slid away. Fine, she grumbled. Fine. Don't bleed on the stairs. And she went to fetch a scrap of timber. Elira stared at the stranger as she guided him upward. How did you do that? He leaned slightly into the wall, breath controlled. I spoke. No, Elira whispered. You commanded. He did not answer. Her room was small, a bed, a table, a washbasin, a shelf of cracked cups and cheaper books. The window rattled in the storm. The air smelled faintly of yeast from below. Elira helped him inside and shut the door with her shoulder, suddenly aware of what she had done. She had brought a strange man into her home. Her heart hammered. Her throat went dry. He stood near the door, as if he sensed her fear the way one sensed smoke. If you want me to leave, he said quietly, say so. Elira forced herself to breathe. She did not want him near her. She did not want his blood on her floor. She did not want the trouble he clearly was. But she also did not want to be the kind of person who stepped over dying men in alleys. You can stay, she said, voice thin. For tonight. He nodded once, accepting her terms with the gravity of a vow. Elira set water to warm and tore an old sheet into strips. She found a jar of bitter salve meant for aches and told herself it would serve. While the kettle hissed, she thrust a spare tunic at him, patched, too small at the shoulders. There's a curtain, she said, pointing. You can clean yourself. He took the cloth and paused. Thank you, he said. 2 words. Yet they sounded unfamiliar on his tongue, as if he had not used them often. When he stepped behind the curtain, Elira busied her hands to keep from thinking. She laid out the strips. She wiped the table. She listened to the rain and to the quiet, controlled sounds of water and cloth. Then he emerged. He was still rough, still bruised, still bleeding, but the grime had been stripped away enough to reveal what lay beneath. His hair, dark and heavy, fell damp to his shoulders. His skin was marked with old scars, thin lines crossing muscle like faded maps. The tunic stretched across his chest and arms, and Elira's mind supplied a startled thought she did not want. He is not built like a laborer. He is built like a weapon. He looked at her, and for the first time uncertainty touched him. You asked my name, he said. Yes. He hesitated. I don't have one. Elira's fingers tightened on a strip of cloth. Everyone has a name. Not me, he said, and the anger returned, sharp, contained. Elira swallowed, then, without fully understanding why, she said, Kale. The name left her mouth like a pebble dropped into water. He blinked. Kale. It's simple, she said, suddenly self-conscious. If you don't remember, you can use that until you do. He tasted it again, quieter. Kale. Something in him settled, barely visible, like a blade sliding into a sheath. Elira gestured toward the chair by the table. Sit. Let me bandage you. He sat. Even injured, he sat like a man used to being obeyed. Elira knelt to examine the wound properly, lifting the hem of his tunic with careful hands. She expected it to be bad. She was not prepared for the truth. The cut was deeper than it had looked in the rain. The bruising around it was darker, almost black, as if poison had kissed the flesh. The edges of the wound were torn, not clean, like something had clawed him rather than steel. Elira's breath caught, and a cold fear threaded through her ribs. This was not a tavern knife. This was not the work of a desperate thief. Something had hunted him. And as she leaned closer, she saw, half hidden beneath blood and swelling, a faint mark near the wound. A pattern, like a crest burned into skin, lines that curved like a crown, or a ring of teeth. Elira's hands trembled. Kale watched her face, quiet as the storm beyond the window. What is it? He asked. Elira swallowed hard, forcing herself to lift the bandage strips. It's worse than I thought, she whispered. And in that small room above a baker's shop, while rain drummed like war on the city's stones, Elira began to understand that she had not brought home a simple stranger. She had brought home the beginning of something that would not let her go. It's worse than I thought, Elira whispered. Kale did not flinch. He only watched her hands the way a soldier watches a blade, calm, resigned, as though pain were a tax he had long ago accepted. Elira cleaned the wound until the water in the basin ran pink. She packed the torn flesh with bitter salve and wrapped him in strips of old linen, pulling each knot tight enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. When she finished, her fingers ached and her stomach had gone hollow with dread. Stay still, she ordered, trying to make her voice sound like certainty. If it festers, you'll burn with fever. He gave the slightest incline of his head. As you command. The words struck her oddly. Not mocking. Not flirtatious. Simply, correct, as if he had been trained from birth to speak to a woman like her as though she were a lady in a high hall. Elira shoved the thought away and banked the fire with her last scraps of coal. She slept in snatches on the edge of her bed, waking to every creak of the building, every gust that rattled the window. Once, near dawn, she woke to the sensation of being watched. Kale stood in the dim room, barefoot on cold stone, his head turned as though listening to something beyond the walls. The lantern light made his shadow long and wrong. What are you doing? She croaked. He turned to her. In the weak light, his eyes were not gold, only brown, muddied by night. Guarding, he said. From what? His gaze returned to the wall. From whatever put that mark on you. On you, Elira corrected, heart thudding. He did not answer. When morning came, it arrived without mercy. The rain did not stop, it only changed its rhythm, becoming a steady, cold sermon against the window panes. The baker below lit his ovens, and the smell of bread rose like a small blessing. Elira boiled water and made thin porridge from oats she could not afford to waste. Kale sat at her table without taking up much space, though he seemed too large for the room. He ate quietly, neither ravenous nor delicate, simply controlled. Then Elira reached for his bandages. Hold still, she said again, softer this time. He lifted his arm as if offering a wrist for inspection. Elira's breath caught. The linen she had wrapped so carefully was clean. Not clean from careful washing, clean as if no blood had ever touched it. She unwound the strips with shaking fingers. Underneath, the gash she'd seen, deep, torn, angry, was gone. Not scabbed. Not half-closed. Gone. In its place was a faint pink seam, like the line left after a long-healed cut. No swelling. No black bruise. No poison-dark flesh. Elira stared until her eyes burned. Her voice failed. She tried again. That's impossible. Cale looked down at his ribs with mild interest, as though he were examining someone else. It appears I heal well. You were bleeding enough to die. Perhaps I chose not to, he said, and there was a flicker of something in his expression, dry, unreadable, before it smoothed back into calm. Elira's mind scrambled for a net to catch the falling truth. Maybe the wound had not been as deep. Maybe the rain had made it seem worse. Maybe the salve had been stronger than she remembered. Maybe she had dreamed the black bruising, the crest-like lines near the torn flesh. But her hands remembered. Her eyes remembered. Fear remembered. You don't have fever, she managed, pressing her fingers to his brow. I don't think I do. Elira swallowed, forcing herself to breathe. Then you're lucky. Cale's gaze lifted to her. I have rarely been lucky. It was the kind of sentence that carried a history behind it like thunder behind a hill. Elira pretended not to hear. For 2 days, the storm held the city in its fist. Elira did not go to the guild house. She told herself she would go tomorrow, then tomorrow again. Each time she imagined leaving Cale alone in her room, the image sharpened into something she could not bear: strangers at her door, hands rough, questions sharp, Cale rising with that strange calm, then blood on her floor. So she stayed. She fetched water. She borrowed more oats. She traded her last spool of thread for a little salt. She cursed herself for it and did it anyway. Cale, in those days, became a quiet presence that rearranged her world without asking permission. He moved through her room as though he knew where things belonged. Not intrusively, carefully. He washed the basin without being told. He mended a broken chair leg with a strip of wood he carved from a packing crate, his hands working with the certainty of a man who'd repaired more than furniture. When Elira protested, he simply said, "It offended me." "What offended you?" "The imbalance," he replied, as if the world were a thing that should sit straight. At night, they spoke in low voices while the rain tapped its thin fingers against the glass. Elira told him small things: how her mother had died with her hands still smelling of herbs, how her father had been a dock clerk who believed in numbers more than gods. She told him she was tired of being hungry and tired of being afraid. Cale listened with an attention that made her feel, for once, like her words were not scraps thrown to a stranger. In return, he offered almost nothing of himself. "I remember no childhood," he said once, staring into the fire. "No home. No family?" Elira asked, trying to keep the hope out of her voice, hope that he belonged to no one. His jaw tightened. "If I had one, they are far from me now." He spoke sometimes as though he were translating himself into her world. His language was clean, his pauses measured. Even his anger, rare, brief, felt disciplined, like a sword kept sheathed for years. The oddest thing was the books. Elira owned only a few, A worn collection of old city laws, a prayer book, and a cracked volume of legends she'd bought for a copper because the cover was pretty. On the third night, she woke to the whisper of pages turning. Cale sat at her table with the legends open, reading by candlelight. His posture was steady, his eyes moving faster than a common man's. "That's a child's book," Elira said, embarrassed. Cale didn't look up. "It is not. It's stories." He finally raised his gaze. "Stories are how the world remembers what it prefers to forget." Then he lowered his eyes again and read aloud, not the simple words Elira remembered, but the older script beneath them, faint as ghost ink. His voice shaped the ancient syllables as if his tongue had been born to them. Elira sat up, heart hammering. "How can you read that?" Cale's brow furrowed, as though the question puzzled him. "I don't know." He turned the page. "But I know this passage." Elira's throat went dry. A warmth grew between them in those days, quiet, unspoken, dangerous. Not the sudden blaze of lust, but something deeper, the slow recognition of another person as necessary. Cale did not touch her. Not once. And yet he was always close. When Elira stepped toward the door, he rose first. When voices sounded in the stairwell, he positioned himself between her and the sound without thinking. When she flinched at thunder, his gaze flicked to her with an intensity that made her feel seen in every corner of herself. One evening, as she returned from borrowing flour from Mistress Rowe, she found Cale standing at her window, staring down into the street. "What is it?" she asked. His shoulders were rigid. "Men." Elira peered through the rain-streaked glass. Two figures loitered near the baker's entrance, cloaks drawn up, heads close. Not neighbors. Not customers. Her blood chilled. Dead men. Cale's hands curled, then relaxed. "Do they threaten you?" "They threaten everyone," Elira whispered. "That's their craft." Cale turned from the window. His eyes had that muted gold again, faint as embers under ash. "Then they will not cross your threshold." Elira forced a laugh. "And how will you stop them?" "Politely?" Cale's gaze held hers. "If they come, I will speak." Elira should have been comforted. Instead, she felt the hairs on her arms lift. On the fourth day, the storm's cold deepened. It seeped into the stone, into the bones of the building itself. Elira was stirring soup when Cale's head snapped up. He went utterly still. The candle flames wavered, though no wind entered the room. "What is it?" Elira asked, suddenly afraid of the quiet. Cale inhaled once, slow, deep. His expression changed in a way she couldn't name, like a man tasting poison on the air. "Out," he said. Elira blinked. "What?" "Out of this building. Now." "Cale." His voice sharpened, not louder but heavier, the weight of command dropping into the room like iron. "Elira. Move." Her body obeyed before her mind could argue. She snatched her cloak, her satchel, and followed him into the stairwell. Doors cracked open as neighbors peeked out, annoyed and sleepy-eyed. "What's the fuss?" Mistress Rowe demanded. Cale's gaze swept the landing. "There is death in your walls." Laughter sputtered. A man scoffed. "Death? It's a draft, that's all." Cale stepped forward, and the stairwell seemed to tighten around him. He pressed his palm to the stone as he had in the passage, eyes narrowing. It's not a draft, he said quietly. It's gas. It's collecting. One spark from the baker's ovens and you will all be ash. Elira's stomach dropped. How, she began. Cale turned to the neighbors. Get out. Take children first. Don't light anything. Don't argue. Something in his tone, something ancient and absolute, cut through their hesitation. People began moving. Not because they trusted him, but because their bodies, like Elira's, recognized command as truth. Even Mistress Rose's mouth snapped shut. She grabbed her shawl and began herding others down the stairs with surprising speed. Outside, rain hit Elira like a slap. Cale stood in the street and lifted his voice just enough to carry. Away from the building. Now. Across the road. People moved. A watchman appeared from the corner, cloak dripping, hand on baton. What's going on here? Cale turned his head. The watchman's posture changed. He straightened, eyes widening slightly, as if he'd recognized not a man, but a rank. My lord, the watchman began, then caught himself, confusion flashing. Sir. Explain yourself. Cale spoke without hesitation. Seal the street. Keep fire away. Send for a mason. There is a leak in the lower stones. The watchman hesitated only a breath, then barked orders to two others who'd followed. They did as Cale said as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Elira stared at Cale through the rain. People obeyed him without knowing why. It took the mason an hour to arrive. When he did, he tested the wall with his tools, then went pale. Gods, he muttered. He's right. Neighbors began crossing themselves. Someone whispered about curses. Elira's pulse pounded in her ears. Cale, she said, dragging him into the shelter of an awning. How did you know? Cale's jaw worked as if he were grinding back a truth. I smelled it. No one can smell stone gas. His eyes flicked to hers, gold again, unmistakable now. Maybe you can't. That night, the building was evacuated. Families huddled in the Guildhouse Hall, shivering under blankets and muttering prayers. Elira sat with Cale on a bench beneath a high window. Lightning forked over the rooftops, pale and furious. Whispers moved like mice through the crowd. He's not from the lower quarter. Look at his eyes. Did you see the way the watch obeyed? Elira tried to ignore it until she heard a different whisper, one that cut sharper than the rest. Theros. She turned. A man stood near the doorway, cloaked in expensive wool despite the wet. His face was narrow, his smile too thin. He stared at Cale as though seeing a ghost. The Rose of the Iron Crown, the man said, voice carrying. The hall went silent. Cale looked up slowly. I don't know you. The stranger's smile widened. Of course you don't. That's the point of the curse, isn't it? Elira's blood turned to ice. Curse? The man's gaze slid to Elira, appraising. And you pulled him out of the gutter? How poetic. Cale rose. Not aggressively. Not theatrically. Simply rising, like a king standing from a throne. The stranger took one step back despite himself. Elira felt it then, felt the shift in the air, the way people leaned away without understanding why. Say what you came to say, Cale said, voice low. The stranger's eyes glittered. Your wolves are searching. Your rivals are starving for your throat. If you're hiding in the lower quarter, you're either mad or helpless. Kale's jaw clenched. I'm not. You are, the stranger cut in. You're the Rose. Alpha King. Iron Crown. And your memory is gone. The hall erupted into uneasy murmurs. Mothers clutched children closer. Men tightened hands on sticks. Elira couldn't breathe. Wealthy Alpha King. Wolf-blooded. Cursed. The words slammed into her mind and found all the places already cracked. Kale's eyes flashed, pure gold, bright enough to look like fire. For a heartbeat, Elira saw something behind his face, not confusion, but fury held on a leash. Then it was gone. I'm not him, Kale said, too controlled. The stranger laughed softly. Tell yourself whatever lets you sleep. But you can't outrun what you are. He tipped his head toward Elira. Enjoy your borrowed king while you can. And then he left, vanishing into the rain. Elira sat frozen until the hall's noise returned in pieces, breaths, whispers, prayers. Kale turned toward her. I don't know what he meant, he said, and for the first time, his composure sounded strained. I don't remember any crown. Elira stood so quickly the bench scraped. Don't. Don't what? Don't look at me like that, she whispered. Like you're innocent. Like you're safe. Kale's expression tightened. Elira. She backed away. Her hands shook. If you're an Alpha King, then men will come. Wolves will come. Not dead men, worse. I won't let anyone hurt you, he said, and the words were immediate, instinctive, possessive enough to make her throat close. That's the problem, Elira snapped, tears burning. You say things like that as if you own the right. Kale went still. Elira swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. I can't, she gestured helplessly at the hall, at the storm, at the invisible world he seemed to drag behind him. I can't be pulled into some war of crowns and beasts. I am not a beast, Kale said, too flat. Elira's laugh broke, bitter and frightened. Your eyes aren't human. You healed in a night. You smelled death and stone. And the watchman called you my lord without even realizing it. Kale's gaze flickered, as if something inside him clawed at the cage of his skull. I don't remember, he said again, and this time it sounded like a plea he didn't know how to make. Elira's chest ached. Because she believed him. And because belief did not make her safe. Leave, she whispered. Kale stared at her. What? Leave me, Elira said, voice cracking. Before whoever you are comes for you through me. A silence stretched between them, filled with rain and distant thunder. Kale's face hardened slowly, like a door closing. He nodded once, as though accepting an order. As you wish, he said. Then his body betrayed him. He staggered, one hand shooting to his ribs, exactly where the wound had been. His breath punched out, sharp and ragged. A vein stood out at his temple. Kale? Elira stepped forward despite herself. He bent at the waist, teeth bared. The hall's candles flickered violently, flames bowing as if frightened. Kale's shoulders jerked. A sound came from him, half growl, half choke. Elira froze. His spine arched. His hands clenched so hard the knuckles whitened. The air around him thickened, as though the room itself had inhaled and was afraid to exhale. Stay back, he rasped. Elira didn't. Lightning flashed through the high window, bleaching the world white for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Elira saw the impossible. Cale's eyes flared gold, bright as molten metal. His bones shifted beneath his skin, not subtly but violently, structure rearranging with cruel purpose. His shoulders broadened. His jaw lengthened. His fingernails darkened into something harder. Elira's mouth opened, but no sound came. People screamed. Benches scraped. Blankets fell. Cale's breath turned into a snarl that vibrated in Elira's teeth. The curse was straining, tearing at him like a chain pulled too tight. "Elira," he forced out, voice shredding. "Run." And then the monster in him answered. His body convulsed once, then surged into a shape too large for a man. Fur erupted across his arms and back like night spreading. His hands became claws. His teeth lengthened, white and terrible. A wolf stood where Cale had been, massive, black as stormwater, eyes burning gold. For one stunned heartbeat, it looked at Elira. Not as prey. As if recognizing her. Then, with a roar that shook dust from the rafters, the alpha wolf turned and launched itself at the nearest window. Glass exploded outward like shattered ice. Rain rushed in. The beast vanished into the night. Elira stumbled forward to the broken frame, cold water splashing her hands. She stared into the storm-dark street, heart hammering, throat aching with words she could not form. Behind her, the hall trembled with fear and prayers. In front of her, the rain swallowed everything. Cale was gone. And Elira stood alone, terrified, soaked to the bone, and realizing with sick clarity that she did not only pity him. She loved him. Even now. Especially now. Cale was gone. Elira stood at the shattered window frame with rain on her hands and glass at her feet, staring into a street that had swallowed him whole. The storm erased tracks as quickly as it made them. The night carried sound away. And the lower quarter, faithful as always, pretended nothing had happened. Behind her, the guildhouse hall roared with panic. People shouted about demons and curses and the end of decent days. Watchmen forced everyone back from the broken window. Someone grabbed Elira's elbow. "Girl, are you hurt?" Elira didn't answer. Her throat had closed around one name, and it refused to open for anything else. Cale. By morning, the city had turned his disappearance into rumor. A wolf the size of a cart. A monster with burning eyes. A phantom king. A drunkard's tale spun over cold bread. Elira didn't have the luxury of disbelief. She had seen bones shift beneath skin. She had heard the crack of a body becoming something that was never meant to fit in a man's life. So she searched. She searched the serviceways and the mossed passages. She searched beneath arches where drunks slept and behind the butcher stalls where blood covered everything kindly. She searched the riverbank, where fog lay like a shroud. She searched until her feet blistered and her hands shook from cold. The rain followed her like a curse. Once, in an alley behind the tannery, she found a smear on stone, dark, half-washed, too thick to be rainwater. Blood. More than a man should lose. Her knees nearly gave out. "Cale," she whispered into the wet air, ridiculous and desperate. No answer came. On the second night, she returned to her room only long enough to warm her fingers, then went back out. The lower quarter slept badly, its dreams thin and sharp. In doorways, people watched her with the wary eyes reserved for the grieving and the doomed. Near midnight, as she crossed a narrow street with lanterns guttering above. She felt it, the shift that meant she was no longer alone. Footsteps behind her. Not the sloppy shuffle of a drunk. Not the familiar pace of a neighbor. Measured. Patient. Elira's breath hitched. She turned quickly. 3 men stood in the rain. They wore cloaks too fine for this quarter, dark wool-edged with subtle stitchwork that caught lamplight like teeth. Their faces were half hidden beneath hoods, but their eyes weren't, pale, bright, and intent. Not human intent. Elira backed up a step. "If you want coin." "We want the rose," one of them said. The name dropped into the street like a stone into still water. Elira's mouth went dry. "I don't know." "You do," another interrupted, voice smooth as oiled steel. "You fed him. You bandaged him. You said his borrowed name as if it could change what he is." Elira's pulse slammed. "He doesn't remember." The first man tilted his head. "He remembers enough to run." Elira's fingers curled inside her cloak. "Who are you?" A chuckle came from the third. "Old debts," he said. "Old teeth." Elira took another step back, eyes darting, an open doorway, a lit window, any witness. The first man lifted a hand, and the street's thin light seemed to dim. Elira's lungs tightened as if the air itself had thickened. "You will come with us," he said, almost politely. "You are not the prize. You are the bell." Elira tried to run. She made it 2 steps before something struck the back of her neck, hard, precise. Her vision burst white. The street tilted. Rain became a roar. She fell into darkness. When she woke, her wrists burned. Rope bit into her skin. The air stank of damp stone and old rot. She blinked hard, trying to force her eyes to focus. She lay on a wooden platform in a cavernous space. Broken rafters arched above like ribs. Rain fell through holes in the roof and struck the floor in steady taps. Lanterns burned in iron cages along the walls, their flames shivering. An abandoned trade hall, one of the old ones, built when the city still pretended it had a future. Elira's mouth tasted like blood. She tried to sit up. Chains rattled. Her hands weren't tied, shackled. Iron circlets around her wrists, bolted to the platform. Not for a woman. For something stronger. The men in fine cloaks stood nearby, speaking in low voices. Around them moved others, figures in the shadows with eyes that glinted when they turned their heads. Wolf-blooded. Elira's stomach turned. "Why?" she rasped. The closest man turned as if he'd forgotten she could speak. His hood shadowed his face, but his smile showed teeth too sharp. "Because kings don't come when you call," he said. "They come when you threaten what they've claimed." "I'm not his," Elira said, voice trembling. The man's smile widened. "You're alive because he chose it. That makes you enough." He stepped closer, resting a hand on the chain near her wrist. The metal rang. "You broke the pattern," he murmured. "You let him be weak. You let him be nothing. That should not have happened." Elira's heart pounded. "He doesn't know who he is." "Oh, he knows," the man said. "Even without memory, wolves know their crown." He leaned in, voice dropping. "And we know how to draw him back into it." He straightened. "Call for him," he ordered. Elira clenched her jaw. "No." A backhand struck her cheek, quick, controlled, not a brawl but a lesson. Pain flared. Her eyes watered. Call, he repeated, patient as cruelty. Elira tasted blood and swallowed it down. Her hand shook against the iron. She looked past them into the hall's broken throat of darkness and did the only thing she could do. Kale, she shouted. Her voice echoed off stone and timber, sounding smaller each time it returned. Kale, she cried again, louder. Please. The rival wolf lords went still, listening as if they could hear beyond human range. Rain hissed through the gaps above. Then, far off, beyond the hall, came a sound. A low howl, torn out of the night. The men smiled. He's coming, one whispered, almost reverent. Elira's breath hitched. Relief and terror tangled until she couldn't tell one from the other. The hall's great doors shuddered. Once. Twice. Then they slammed inward with a boom that shook dust from the rafters. A shape filled the threshold, massive, black, slick with rain, eyes burning gold like twin coins held to fire. Water streamed off fur. Claws clicked on stone. The alpha wolf stepped into lantern light. Elira's throat closed around a sob. Kale, no. Not Kale. Not anymore. The rival wolf lords spread out like hunters around a wounded god. Steel flashed, short blades, curved and cruel. But it wasn't the weapons that made Elira's skin crawl. It was their certainty. They believed they could win. The alpha wolf's lips peeled back, exposing fangs that looked too long for any mouth. It growled, a sound that vibrated in the bones. Deros, one of the men called, voice carrying. Do you remember your throne? The wolf's head tilted slightly, as if considering the word. Its gaze swept the hall, not frantic, not animal. Calculating. Then its eyes found Elira. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Elira saw something behind the gold, recognition, fierce and aching. And the wolf moved. Not with the wild flailing of a beast cornered. With intent. With strategy. It struck the closest rival first, not at the throat but at the knee, crippling him with one snap. It pivoted, using the man's falling body as a shield against a blade, then slammed its weight into another, sending him skidding across wet stone. A third lunged. The wolf caught his forearm in its jaws and twisted. Bone cracked. The man screamed. The alpha didn't waste motion. It didn't play. It didn't rage. It reclaimed. Elira watched through tears as blood splattered the floor and rain washed it thin. Lantern light flickered, casting the battle in violent shadows. Yet even in the chaos, there was order, commands barked in a tongue Elira didn't know, answered by snarls and sudden shifts in the shadows. More wolf-blooded poured in through side doors. Not the rivals. Others, fighters in worn armor, moving like a trained pack. Their eyes glowed faintly, and when they saw the alpha, they lowered their heads as they fought. As if the world had just snapped back into its proper shape. The rival leader, hood down now, face sharp and proud, grabbed Elira's chain and yanked her upright. You, he hissed, putting a blade to her throat. Call him off or I open you like a... The alpha wolf turned. Its eyes locked on the blade. The air changed. A pressure fell over the hall, heavy as a crown settling onto a head. The wolf-blooded around them faltered, as if their instincts had been seized by a stronger will. The rival leader's hand trembled. Deros, he spat, forcing bravado. Still ruled by a human. The Alpha lunged. So fast it seemed to blur. It didn't go for the man's throat. It went for the chain. Its jaws clamped around iron and crushed. Metal shrieked. The shackle burst open, sparking, the link snapping as if made of brittle wire. Elira dropped, gasping, free hands flying to her neck. The rival leader tried to retreat. A massive paw pinned him to the floor. The Alpha lowered its head, breath steaming in the cold air, and something happened that made Elira's heart stop. The wolf's form began to change. Not fully, not yet. But the fur along its shoulders rippled as if something beneath it was pushing outward. Bones shifted. A deep, guttural sound tore from its chest, half pain, half rage. The rival leader stared up, eyes wide. "The curse," he croaked. "It's breaking." The Alpha's jaw opened. And a man's voice, raw, fractured, came from the beast's throat. "Enough." The single word rang through the hall like judgment. Then the Alpha shuddered, staggering back. Blood ran from a gash along its flank, some blade had found it. Its breath hitched, heavy and wet. It had won. But it was dying. Elira crawled toward it, hands shaking. Ka. The Alpha collapsed. For one awful heartbeat, it lay still. Then the air exploded with sound, howls, voices, boots on stone. The wolf-blooded warriors dropped to one knee, heads bowed. Elira stared. Because the beast on the floor was shrinking. Fur receded like shadow at sunrise. Claws shortened. The great head reshaped, jaw narrowing, teeth pulling back into a human mouth. Kale lay there, no, the rose, bare-chested beneath torn remnants, blood streaking his skin, scars mapped across muscle like old wars. His eyes were still gold, brighter now, as if something inside him had awakened and lit every corridor of his mind. He sucked in a breath, sharp, like a man surfacing from deep water. And he looked at Elira as though he had never seen her before. Not with confusion. With distance. With recognition stripped of softness. Elira's chest caved. "You're back," she whispered, voice breaking. "You remember." The roast pushed himself up with a grimace, as if pain were an inconvenience rather than a threat. Warriors moved to support him, but he lifted a hand, commanding them away. He rose to his feet, towering in the lantern light, blood and rain and power clinging to him like a cloak. "Bind the traitors," he said coldly. "The rest, dismiss." "Yes, my king," the kneeling warriors answered as one. Elira's throat tightened at the word, king. Therasa's gaze shifted to her, then away, as if she were a detail to be handled. He spoke to a warrior near the door. "Escort the woman home." Elira flinched. "No, Theros, Kale." His eyes flicked back, sharp as a blade's edge. "You will go," he said, voice without warmth. "This is no place for you." "I came for you," Elira whispered. "I searched for you." Silence. Then, softer, almost weary, Theros said, "And it almost killed you." He turned away as if that ended everything. Two warriors approached Elira. Their hands were gentle, but their grip was firm. They guided her out into the rain. Elira looked back once. Theros stood in the broken hall surrounded by kneeling men, lanterns trembling around him like fearful stars. For a heartbeat, his head tilted, as if he felt her gaze. Then he didn't look up. And the man she had sheltered, the man who had washed in her basin, who had read by candlelight, who had stood between her and the world, was gone. Weeks passed. The city changed as though it had been waiting for permission. Watchmen grew sharper, patrols more frequent. Strange cloaked figures appeared on rooftops at dusk, then vanished by dawn. People spoke in quieter voices about wolves and kings and a throne that had returned. Elira went back to her life because life does not pause for heartbreak. She repaired her window with borrowed glass. She returned the shackle marks on her wrists beneath long sleeves. She went to the guildhouse with her satchel and her stubbornness and asked for work until someone finally gave her copying to do. Coin returned to her pouch, 1 copper at a time. But at night, when the rain began, she mourned. Not the rose of the Iron Crown. Kale. The nameless man who had been gentle without knowing why. The man who had looked at her like she mattered when the whole city treated her as a problem to be moved along. Sometimes she caught herself listening for footsteps in the stairwell. Sometimes she woke with the taste of his name on her tongue. And always, she remembered the moment his eyes turned cold. When the first true break in the weather came, it lasted exactly 1 day. Then the rain returned, as if the sky had remembered its favorite habit. Elira found herself walking without deciding to. Down through the lower quarter, past the baker's shop, past the serviceways, toward the stone passage where everything had begun. The alley was the same. Lanterns still hung in iron cages. Moss still clung to the walls. The cobbles were still slick with water. And for a moment, Elira almost laughed at herself. Of course he wouldn't come here. Kings didn't return to gutters. She stood anyway, letting rain soak her hair, letting the memory of that first night press against her ribs until it hurt. Fool, she whispered to herself. He was never yours. A soft sound came from behind her. The clean click of an umbrella opening. Elira turned slowly. The rose stood a few steps away, the rain held at bay by dark cloth. He wore no crown, but the city's power sat on him as surely as metal ever could, fine cloak, polished boots, the subtle presence of guards kept far enough back to be respectful. His eyes were still gold. But when they met Elira's, something in them softened, just slightly, as if a door she'd thought locked had cracked open. Elira, he said. Her throat tightened. My king. The title tasted wrong in her mouth. Theros's jaw flexed. Don't. Elira's hands clenched. Why are you here? He looked past her into the alley, as if seeing himself seated in rags against wet stone. Because this is where it broke, he said quietly. Elira's breath caught. What broke? Theros's gaze returned to her, and for once, he looked human. Not distant. Not untouchable. The curse, he said. Elira stared, rain sliding down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. There was really a curse. Yes. His voice roughened. Placed for cruelty. For believing power made me invincible. For treating loyalty like a chain. Elira swallowed. And it took your memory. It took everything that made me feared, Theros said. My name. My throne. My pack's obedience. It left me in the only state I never understood, helpless. Elira's voice came out thin. So why did it end? Theros's eyes held hers, unwavering. Because you loved me when I was nothing. Elira's chest ached. I didn't know who you were. That was the point, he said. The curse could only break if someone chose me without the crown. Elira laughed once, sharp and bitter. And when you got it back, you treated me like a mistake. The rose flinched, not outwardly, but in the tension of his shoulders. I did, he admitted. Because I was afraid. Afraid? Elira echoed, incredulous. Of what you saw in me, he said, voice low. When I remembered everything. All the blood. All the choices. All the ways I had used people. His gaze dropped for a heartbeat. And I thought if I touched you with that, I would ruin you. Elira's anger trembled at the edge of tears. You ruined me anyway. The rose stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. Then let me ask properly. He lowered the umbrella slightly so rain struck his shoulders too, leveling them in the same storm. I will not ask you to kneel, he said. I will not buy you with wealth or bind you with titles. His gold eyes searched hers. I only ask you to choose. Elira's breath shook. In her mind, she saw Cale at her table, reading by candlelight. She saw his hand flattening her wet papers against stone. She saw the wolf's eyes locking on her in the trade hall, not hunting, but finding. She swallowed hard and stepped forward until the umbrella sheltered them both. I choose the man who learned mercy, Elira whispered. Not the beggar. Not the king. Theros' eyes closed briefly, as if something inside him finally unclenched. When he opened them again, the cold distance was gone. He didn't reach for her like a conqueror. He reached like a man afraid she might vanish. Elira placed her hand against his chest, warm beneath rain, steady beneath scars. Equal, she said, as if making it a law. The rose nodded once. Equal. And in that forgotten stone passage where kings had fallen and risen again, the rain kept falling, faithful as ever. But this time it fell on two people standing together, neither above the other. Just human. Just chosen. And the alley, in the old city's mouth, became legend. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next story.